Members, the House and Committee on the Student Loan Scheme Amendment Bill number 3 is resumed. Before the dinner break, we were debating Part 1 and Grant Robertson had the call. Here's half a minute remaining.
Mr. Chair.
Grant Robertson.
Yeah, half a minute hardly seems enough to be able to go through this. As I was saying before the dinner break, the Legislation Advisory Committee made a very direct reference to the change that is occurring in Section 162A, which effectively takes what is currently a civil matter, the non-repayment of loans, and turns it into a criminal matter. And the Legislation Advisory Committee said that they consider that this is an unprincipled basis on which to create an offence. That is a very serious thing for the LAC to say, that this is an unprincipled basis for creating an offence. And what they are referring to is that the only reason Inland Revenue, or the only reason the government is introducing this provision on behalf of Inland Revenue to create this new criminal offence of not repaying your loan, is so that they can do the arrest at the border provision. Mr. Chair.
Grant Robertson.
Is so that they can do the arrest at the border provisions. So it's not based, as I said before the dinner break, on any particular injury that's occurring to the public, any particular set of circumstances that warrant a criminal offence. It's merely so the arrest at the border provision should come into place. And I think, Mr. Chair, that we should take the words of the Legislation Advisory Committee and their chair, the Honourable Sir Grant Hammond, seriously here. There is nothing behind this provision that is in the way of principle. It is quite simply a gimmick. It's a gimmick designed to look like the issue of a repayment of student loans is being taken seriously by creating a criminal offence and then a set of arrangements for which people can be arrested at the border. But in reality, it'll make very little difference to the repayment of loans. And as I said, Mr. Chair, at the start of my last call, on this side of the House, we support initiatives that will provide for an increased rate of repayment of student loans. We want to see people pay their loans back, both because that's what they signed up to do in the contracts that they signed, but also because it's good for the New Zealand taxpayer. But this bill isn't it, and Clause 8 does not provide for this. Because we know from what we heard in the Select Committee that there actually will be, while there is a great deal of threat and there's a great deal of concern among people, the actual number of arrests, nobody knows what's going to happen. The police have quite clearly said they don't have the resources to involve themselves in arresting people at the border. We don't actually know, other than some indication that Inland Revenue would like to make an example of some people. And as I raised in my second reading speech, Mr. Chair, a number of us on this side of the House have been approached by people living overseas who have been perhaps in dispute with IRD about their loan, who want to come back to New Zealand for a family event, for a wedding, for a funeral, and are now in fear that they won't actually be able to do that. So this bill, rather than acting as some kind of encouragement to young New Zealanders to come home to contribute to New Zealand, actually will act as a deterrent without achieving the goal that the government has set itself of increasing the rate of repayment. So it's the worst of all worlds, Mr. Chair, to have a bill, and in particular Clause 8, that creates a criminal offence out of what is essentially a civil matter for no real purpose whatsoever, Mr. Speaker and Mr. Chair. And in the committee, we were challenged, the Select Committee, we were challenged by National Party members to say, well, what would you do? What would you do to help increase the rates of repayment? Well, Mr. Chair, we could start by actually talking to the borrowers concerned and working out a repayment plan that works for them. Because another clause that I'll come back to in this bill is around how it is that the repayment obligations of overseas-based borrowers are calculated. And at the moment it is an extremely blunt instrument which simply says it's a percentage of your loan and you've got to pay it back. It doesn't matter how much you're earning. If we were really serious as a parliament about increasing the rate of repayment, we would work on arrangements that were actually based on the earnings of people overseas, and that gave them an incentive to pay back. It's so big, it's so difficult, it's so out of proportion to what people are earning overseas, they give up. and they say, I can't be bothered with it. I'm not going to deal with this. And those people, every year they stay away from New Zealand. Every time the government introduces a gimmicky provision like this, that means they'll be less likely to return to New Zealand and less likely to pay back their loan. So, Mr Chair, we would, on this side of the House, love to support a bill that came before us that was full of new and good and interesting ideas about how to encourage New Zealand overseas-based borrowers to repay their loans, but this bill is not that. Mr Chair, in Clause 8, in Clause 8, we'll come to that, Dr Clark. In Clause 8, the new Section 162A and B have been slightly altered by the Select Committee. And I will credit the Select Committee with removing one of the most egregious elements of this, which is in what is the new Clause 162B2D, which actually allowed the court to apply any order it liked to somebody that was arrested under these provisions, anything at all. They could have thrown them in jail, they could have taken away their assets, they could have done anything. Thankfully, that has now been removed, but the extent of which...
Mr Chair.
David Clark.
I look forward to making this contribution and